Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Behold the Savior. So glad that you could join us again. Here we are continuing our series on the seventh day. And so far we've tracked the Sabbath throughout history. We've taken a look at 20 centuries of Sabbath keeping. We saw how God has maintained a remnant group of people all throughout history, really, that have been faithful in following all 10 commandments, which ultimately lead to Jesus. And we've seen what the Sabbath meant to us today. We've seen how we can keep the Sabbath. How do we keep God's holy day holy? And we've seen some parameters and guidelines that He has laid out for us, and the ultimate health blessings that He has given us through the Sabbath as well. Now we're going to take a look at the Sabbath tomorrow. What does it mean in the future? And it begins with a story, a Bible study that I gave to a gentleman one time. Before I was in ministry full-time, I used to write my own Bible studies and share them with people. I'd share them with groups and individuals, and I had sort of a test subject. I'd write the Bible study up, and I would give it to him, and he would take a look at it. And one time, regarding the Sabbath, I typed up the Bible study and dropped it on his desk, and he read it, and this time he had a little bit of input on it. We were talking a little bit later, and he came up to me and he said, "Is God really sitting up there with some sort of calendar keeping track of what we do on what day?" In other words, he couldn't grasp, does God really have nothing better to do than to keep track of what we're doing on which day of the week? And I said to him, well, it doesn't matter what I say. Let's take a look at what the Bible has to say. Exodus chapter 20, verse 8 says, "Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy." Remember, this was to the Jews that came out of Egyptian bondage, shouted it from a mountaintop, engraved it in stone. He said, hey, remember the Sabbath commandment that I gave you all the way back at creation before there were any Jews? And we know that the Sabbath wasn't instituted at Sinai. It had to have existed before, because prior to this was the incident with the manna. God sent a double blessing through the manna. He would rain down this bread from heaven, and they would go out and collect it 6 days a week. And each day they could not keep it from one day to the next, except for that sixth day. They would be able to keep a double portion. They would gather a double portion and keep it from the sixth day to the seventh day. So they would learn how to keep the Sabbath, and they wouldn't have to go out and labor for it. It was a very wonderful thing. And in this commandment, it is not also for those in the past. Hey, remember that day? Keep it holy. Also commands down to the future. Hey, remember, don't forget to keep the Sabbath holy. The one commandment that God tells us to remember is the one that most of us have forgotten. And with all of that in mind, it makes good sense why the devil would raise up an entity that would think to change times and law. Well, there's only one commandment that deals with time, and that is the fourth commandment, which deals with the seventh-day Sabbath. And we don't even have to guess who this entity is. In fact, they advertise the fact that they have changed the Sabbath. And in a book called The Convert's Catechism of Catholic Doctrine, it's a very to-the-point book, and it's relatively small. It's only 150 pages, and it's done very well. It's question and answer, bullet point, quick question, quick answer, straight to the point. It's a good way to teach, and it is a gold mine of error, to be perfectly honest with you. But here we have some honesty. Which is the Sabbath day? Answer: Saturday is the Sabbath day. Question: why do we observe Sunday instead of Saturday? We observe Sunday instead of Saturday because the Catholic Church, in the Council of Laodicea in AD 336, transferred the solemnity from Saturday to Sunday. Interesting here that it's the Catholic Church that claimed the authority to be able to change an express commandment of God, and it took place in the Council of Laodicea, which happened in around AD 336. Now, before we continue from here, let's understand this Council of Laodicea. There was actually some good things that came out of the Council of Laodicea. They were wrestling with the organizing of the church. One of the things that they were working to organize was which books are considered biblical and inspired, and which books are not to be a part of the canon, the Bible, the closed canon that we have today. Now, interesting part was this takes place only 15 years after a very important incident in history that takes place. Now, in the year 313, there was a man raised up by the name of Constantine, Emperor Constantine, and he was nominally converted to Christianity. I say nominally because he wasn't baptized till he was on his deathbed. And the reasoning was that, well, he was a man of war. He had blood on his hands, and he'd go to war often and kill people, and it would be hard to consecrate yourself to God and ask for forgiveness of sins when you know you're going to do it again the very next day. Now, you can understand that reasoning, but here's the thing. If you want to consecrate yourself to God, now is the time of salvation. Now is the acceptable day. If you want to give yourself to God, do it now. Don't wait till the end of your life. You never know when that's going to be. If you're planning for it for 20 years, you may not make it another 20 days. Give your heart to Jesus now. Anyway, this is what Emperor Constantine did. He nominally is converted, and really he was responsible for sort of legalizing Christianity, ended the persecution of it. But there was a different problem that came. The persecution really began to end, but the destruction of the foundation and principles of Christianity really began to crumble. And here you have the greatest influx into Christianity of all time. We always talk about church growth. We want churches to grow and be strong, and we want to be careful to not do that at the cost of what the Bible says. He was converted around the time of 313, and largely due to the work of his mother. But a few years later, even around 315, 318, he had a coin minted. And on this coin, there was a picture of the sun god, Sol Invictus. And on one side of this engraving, you have a picture of the sun. And on the other side, what do you have? A picture of the cross. So here you see after his conversion, he's still clinging to paganism, paganistic worship of the sun god. And this is when really the blending of paganism and Christianity really began to take place. And in 321, only 15 years before the Council of Laodicea, he issued the Edict of Milan, which says this: "On the venerable day of the sun, let the magistrate and people residing in cities rest, and let all workshops be closed." Now notice that, on the venerable day of the sun. Did he say on Sunday? Did he call it the Sabbath? Or did he call it the venerable day of the sun? This was not about maintaining Christianity and putting the focus on God. This was about worshiping the sun god and blending paganism and Christianity and tainting the worship of the one true God. On the venerable day of the sun, let the magistrate and people residing in cities rest. Let all workshops be closed. In the country, however, persons engaged in agricultural work may freely and lawfully continue their pursuits. Because it often happens that another day is not suitable for grain growing or for vine planting, lest by neglecting the proper moment for such operations, the bounty of heaven should be lost. In other words, what do you have here? You have the very first blue law. In other words, a law mandating what can and can't happen on Sunday. He's commanding a day of rest or worship on Sunday, unless you're a farmer, and then you can continue because harvesting and grain growing is very time sensitive. Either way, what you have here is the very first forced worship on Sunday. And this was a landmark in history. And what you have here is Rome and the papacy begin to link hands. Government begins to unite with religion, and what you have is an absolute mess. It hasn't worked in the past, it doesn't work then, and it's not going to work today. But there's a problem. Now, we have a warning from George Santayana, 1905. He said this: "Those who fail to learn from history are condemned to repeat it." And Churchill slightly changed it in 1948 in a speech to the House of Commons. But the principle is this: those who fail to learn history are condemned to repeat it. Historians notice that history seems to be cyclical. And you can see this in the life of the Israelite nation easily in the Old Testament. They'd get themselves into trouble, and then God would send a judge or a prophet. Things would be good for a while. And then they'd turn from God, get themselves into trouble. God would send somebody to pull them out. It was very cyclical, and we see the same thing happening even to this day today. Now, let's take a look at Revelation chapter 13. If the government could link hands with the church in the past, is it possible that it could happen again in the future? Revelation chapter 13 verse 11 says this, "Then I saw another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had 2 horns like a lamb and spoke like a dragon." Now here you have 2 great entities in the book of Revelation. Now oftentimes people talk about the beast of Revelation. The Bible actually talks about 2 beasts in Revelation. Let's break it down. Then I saw another beast. The first beast, every single one of the reformers identified as the Roman Catholic Church. Now, who is the second beast? Then I saw another beast coming up out of the earth. What is a beast anyway? Daniel chapter 7 verses 17 and 23 tells us it represents kings or kingdoms. So you have this political power that would rise, a beast. Then I saw another beast or political power coming up out of the earth. What does the earth represent? The first beast comes up out of the water, and Revelation 17:15 tells us that the water represents peoples, multitudes, nations, and tongues. So the first beast comes up in a populated area in Europe. This second beast, the second political power, comes up in a sparsely populated area, the earth. And he had 2 horns like a lamb. Now, horns in the Bible often represent power. You see this in the book of Daniel, a creature with 7 heads and 10 horns. And in the book of Revelation, 7 heads, 10 horns, you see sort of very similar description. And many Bible scholars believe that these 2 horns represent the 2 great teachings and foundations of the United States of America. Freedom to worship without the dictates of a pope, and freedom of government without the force of imposition from a king. Freedom of church and freedom of state. And in the United States of America, you have something that it actually was not the very first time it's happened, a democratic government, even though we live in a republic, but we operate in a democracy. We have the ability to be able to select our own leader. And that was sort of unique at the time, and you would have to imagine the greatest, the most popular church in the world would have to be mentioned in the Bible, the Church of Rome. And the greatest nation that ever was, the United States of America, would have to be mentioned in the Bible as well. Then I saw another beast, a political power, coming up out of the earth, a sparsely populated area. And he had 2 horns like a lamb, freedom of state and freedom of religion. And like a lamb, what does that mean? Now, oftentimes a lamb in the Bible represents none other than Jesus himself. When John the Baptist saw Jesus coming, he said, "Behold the Lamb of God, which taketh away the sin of the world." So we have a political entity that would come up in a sparsely populated area that would have freedom of church, freedom of religion, that would be founded on Christian, Christ-like principles and teachings, and that it would speak like a dragon. Unfortunately, all of the good that this entity would do, it would turn to speak and act like the dragon. Now, who is the dragon? Now, the Bible tells us who that is, that serpent of old called the devil and Satan. But even more specifically, in Revelation chapter 12, the dragon is the devil working through Rome. And the devil worked through Rome to try to kill Jesus as an infant. The devil worked through Rome to kill Jesus as an adult. But he couldn't kill the cause of God, so then it transferred from pagan Rome to papal Rome, where the devil worked to try to replace Jesus. Then I saw another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had 2 horns like a lamb and spoke like a dragon. And he exercises all the authority of the first beast in his presence, and causes the earth and those who dwell in it to worship the first beast whose deadly wound was healed. And this can be no other entity than the United States of America. Even the timing of Revelation chapter 13 tells us the second beast comes up as about the time that the first beast is receiving a deadly wound. Many believe that that's a reference to what took place in 1798, where Napoleon's general Alexander Berthier took the Pope into captivity, where he died in exile. To many, it looked like it was the end of the Church of Rome. But that deadly wound would be healed. Just like in the past, the church linked hands with the state. We expect, biblically speaking, to see the same thing. The United States will link hands with the papacy. Have we seen that, or do we see that? Yes, we do. Here in the Bush Jr. administration, we see that the linking hands of the United States with the papacy. And here we see in the Obama administration, the papacy linking hands with the United States of America. Here in the Trump administration, we see the United States linking hands with the papacy. Now, here at the death of Pope John Paul II, as he's being paraded by, what you see is three of the most powerful men in the world bowing down as the Pope is paraded by. You have George Bush Jr., George Bush Sr., and Bill Clinton. Now, it doesn't matter who the president is. Doesn't even matter what political party is controlling the government at the time. Bible prophecy will take place no matter who it is, because the Bible is never wrong. Now, there are things that can usher some things in a little quicker also, and we're going to see how maybe that could take place. Let's continue through Revelation chapter 13, verse 15. It says he was granted, the second beast, he was granted power to give breath to the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak and cause as many as would not worship the image of the beast to be killed. What is this image of the beast? What is this that would cause such a thing? Many theologians agree that this is none other than the seventh-day Sabbath, that there would come a time where Sunday as a day of worship would be forced upon the people. Now, I know you may be thinking, well, that sounds ridiculous and crazy. Hang in there. We're going to get there. Let's continue to look through it. In verse 16, he causes all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on their right hand or in their foreheads. Now, this is an area where there's been much contention, and it's a lot of it is because of this word right here, to receive a mark on their right hand or in their forehead. That word mark in some other Bible translations has been translated into tattoo. That's not what the Greek says. It should not be translated into English that way. It should be translated mark. But popular novels and media have picked up on it. Many people believe there's going to be some sort of tattoo, and then you're going to have the mark of the beast. Well, what is the mark of the beast? Mark in the right hand or on the forehead? The right hand seems to be a symbol in the Bible, according to Ecclesiastes. Whatever your hand finds to do, do it with all your might. Seems to be a symbol of your action. Someone may be marked in the right hand by working on God's holy day or by forcing people towards worship on Sunday. Somebody may be marked in the forehead. Forehead is a symbol of thinking. That's where your thought process, your reasoning, that's where your morality takes place, literally in the prefrontal lobe of your brain. In the Bible, we find that God says to store the law in your minds and in your hearts. Well, where's that? That's in your mind, your thinking. So this is where God's law would be placed. So someone may be marked in the right hand by working on the Sabbath or forcing others one way or the other. Or somebody may be marked on the forehead by believing that Sunday is a holy day in spite of what the Bible says. Now, the beast's people are not the only ones that will be marked. Even God's people will be marked. That may surprise you. His mark is only in the forehead. In other words, God's people will choose to follow God. There will be no forcing there at all. It continues, and that no one may buy or sell except one who has the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name. How could it become such a thing of force? When I started to teach about the United States' role in Bible prophecy, when I first started, and I wasn't the first one to teach this, don't get me wrong, but when I caught hold of it and started to teach it, people would say, "You're crazy. I could never see that happening." Now, Most people are, yeah, I can kind of see how that could happen. I have a disclaimer here, though. I'm not interested in conspiracy theories. I'm not interested in chemtrails. I'm not interested in rumors about guillotines being shipped into the United States and rumors that they're going to cut off all the heads of the Sabbatarians, Sabbath keepers. I don't know. May that happen? Yes. No, I don't know. There's no proof, first of all. Now, there will be a death decree. There's no question about that. But how remains a bit of speculation. We need to be careful that we're not getting so wrapped up into the conspiracies that we completely lose sight of the gospel. Remember, the whole point of all this is to focus on Jesus. If you focus on Jesus, everything's going to be fine, I promise you. So how could Sunday blue laws become enforced? And really, it wouldn't be all that hard. Now, imagine, well, you know how many liberties we were willing to give up as a result of the attacks on American soil on September 11, 2001. Many freedoms we were willing to. Why? Because you didn't know where the next bomb was going to take place. You never knew where the next terrorist was going to strike. So government do whatever it takes to protect us, and we did that at what cost? How could these blue laws be used as a way to force people to not buy or sell on the Sabbath, and or to buy or sell at all? Well, one may be a way to identify a terrorist as a heretic. Let's see, most Christians worship on what day? Most Christians worship on Sunday. Many Christians and Jews worship on Saturday. What day do Muslims keep as a holy day? They don't really keep it as a Sabbath. They keep it as sort of a holy day. It's Friday. Why? Because Saturday and Sunday were already taken. So what if, imagine, this is a preacher's imagination here. Now, so follow me with that in mind. Imagine if extreme Islam, now notice I said extreme Islam begins to plant bombs in elementary schools and blows them up all throughout the country. The world would be terrified. You never know when the next strike is going to become. You never know if your children are going to be safe. So they would say, government, do whatever it takes to protect us. Well, one of the ways to identify a terrorist may be, what day do they keep holy? What day are they worshiping on? This is a Christian country, and we ought to be in church on Sunday, supposedly. So if you're not in church on Sunday, then you must be a heretic, you must be a terrorist, you must be against us. If you're not for us, you must be against us. How else could this take place? Could it be to reset the family unit? You know, the Pope has a very strong agenda for family, and that's not all bad, don't get me wrong. But you know, this country and the rest of the world along with it has sort of taken a left turn. We've legalized abortion, even though the Bible clearly says it is an abomination. We've legalized same-sex marriage, which again is a complete abomination in the Bible, and the transgender agenda, and so on and so on. And by the way, most of America does not seem to agree with this. The press just seems to push it that way. Now, imagine if there's an uprising that says we've gone so far away from the family unit that we need to come back to God. We need to begin to force people to worship on Sunday so we can help bring the family back to where God needs it to be. So one way to do that may be you make sure you check in Sunday morning, because if you're not for us, you must be against us. Take a look at here, and this is from the Catholic Sun from 2012. Sunday must be a day of rest for everyone. Notice that. Sunday must be a day of rest for everyone, so people can be free to be with their families and with God, the Pope said. By defending Sunday, one defends human freedom, he said during his weekly general audience at St. Peter's Square, June 6th. Again, that's 2012. So it wouldn't be all that hard to imagine a world that would force going to church for the sake of the family. What about some sort of government downturn with the economy? All it would take would be one more severe depression or even a recession to institute some of these things. Now, imagine a world where you have the much of the country, anyway, in the United States, that is government dependent. Imagine most of the people on food stamps, and imagine most of the people that are government reliant for medicine. How easy, in light of the aforementioned problems, how easy would it be then to manipulate, you cannot buy or sell on the Sabbath? And imagine, well, unless you check in on Sunday morning, punch the card or scan or whatever, unless you're there on Sunday morning, we're not going to give you your food stamps for that day or for that time or whatever. How many mothers are going to allow their children to go hungry because they're not willing to toe the line? Most people are going to fall into that. What about medicine? Think of people on dialysis, diabetes, and those issues. Imagine that, hey, if you don't do what we say, if you don't worship on this day because you might be a heretic, then we're not going to give you your medicine. Most people are going to fall right into that because they're not going to be willing to go without their medicine. Now you see how it could be easily turned this way. What about political gang wars? In the 90s, it used to be the Bloods versus the Crips, East Coast versus West Coast. They were always at each other's throats. And now, the two greatest gangs in the world seem to be Democrats versus the Republicans. And I'm not condemning anybody, by the way, that may be on food stamps or may be receiving medical assistance. It's a good program to help out, don't get me wrong. But you see how that could be used as a weapon. I'm not condemning anybody that may be a Republican or a Democrat, but you see the problems. Never before has it been where you have family members being excommunicated because they have different political views. It's never been this bad as it is today. It's so polarizing. If you're not this particular political group, then you're against us. Take a look at this. This is from the New York Times. Let's look at the headline. We've all just made fools of ourselves again. Did you ever see the things that happen in politics? Just shake your head and wonder what the rest of the world is thinking. We just all made fools of ourselves again. Maybe it's time to declare a national Sabbath. Maybe it's time to step back from scandal mongering and assess who we are right now. These things all of a sudden don't seem that far-fetched. All it would take would be one or two significant events to push the final events of Bible prophecy into action. Here's my encouragement to you, though. Stay faithful to God and His Word. His Word provides hope. I don't tell you these things to keep you awake at night. I don't tell you these things to depress you or to instill fear. Actually, to instill hope. Because if you're following Jesus, you have nothing to worry about. You stay faithful to Him, He's going to stay faithful to you, I promise. Let me tell you what Revelation 14 says about God's faithful people. These are the ones who were not defiled with women. In other words, foreign religions like paganism, sun worship. For they are virgins, they're pure. These are the ones who follow the Lamb wherever He goes. These were redeemed from among men, being firstfruits of God to the Lamb, and in their mouth was found no deceit, for they are without fault before the throne of God. How would you like to follow the Lamb wherever He goes, no matter where He asks? Are you willing to do that? Why not begin to keep His seventh-day Sabbath holy today and please God in all aspects of your life?